My mom had me. I know she was very young. My mom was 6 years old when she had me. I grew up in a small community called the UDX Square, located at the north end of Halifax. Many of us referred to the community as the box because there were many experiences that I think people in mainstream society just don't face on a daily basis. I know she was very young. A small community called the UDX Square, located at the north end of Halifax. Many of us referred to the community as the box because there were many experiences that I think people in mainstream society just don't face on a daily basis. My nickname was Hot Rod. I was a skinny little kid, 110 pounds soaking wringing wet. My mom had me. I know she was very young. My mom was 16 years old when she had me. And trying to raise a little black kid in the community, it was quite challenging. The relationship with my mom, it was a struggle. I was really attached to my mom as a single child. I remember I would never leave her side. Right, I see my mom go through a lot, and I remember she told me that she wasn't going; she was staying home with me, and she told me she was just going to the dirt. Rod, I'm just going to the dirt, and then she never told me that for a long time. That hurt me because my mom lied to me, and you know, when you love somebody unconditionally and they give you that lie, it hits you where it hurts. So it was something that kind of stuck with me to the point where I remember it. I'm, 40 years young today. So, that's something that happened to me as a kid, and I can vividly remember it like it's yesterday. I know she can too. I never really got to know my dad on a personal level until he was released from prison. So my dad done a life sentence. Growing up in the hood, my dad had established somewhat of a name for himself. And my dad was a well-known hustler in Indy. School wasn't working for me, although I was sticking with it. So I sold drugs. That's what I knew. I started with a half of 8 and worked my way all the way to OZ. I would break it down into $20 and $50 stones. I was a good hustler. This all started to change on October 17, 1993.
In a case that began when a 15-year-old African Nova Scotian boy was arrested by a white police officer. The boy's identity was protected because he was a juvenile, so the case was referred to by his initials, RDS, and his case was talked about from coast to coast. It went to the highest court in the land. It set a precedent, mostly because of comments made by
I was charged with assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, obstructing justice. I mean, it was numerous charges. I don't even remember them all, but there's 3 right off the hop. That very case was labeled RDS, Rodney Darren Small. These are archives. The appellant RDS was traveling between his grandmother's home and his mother's home on his bicycle. He testified that he observed some people, including women, in the vicinity of a police car on Brunswick Street. The radio transmission indicated that a number of non-white quotation male youths were seen running from the stolen vehicle, and the pursuit was underway. When asked by the Crown if he hit the police officer with the bike or his hands, he testified, "I didn't touch him with my bike. I didn't touch him with my hands." The appellant RDS testified he was then grabbed by Constable off his bike and put in a chokehold. He could not breathe and was almost knocked out. What I do remember is an approach that the police use in dealing with our youth, and it was called the shotgun approach. So what they would do is they would charge you with as many charges as possible, and then they would come to you closer to your court date, and they would get you to make a deal. So what they would do is say, we'll drop, say I had 9 charges, we'll drop these 6, but we want these 3, the bigger ones, to stick. And I wasn't willing. Constable Steinberg testified that after originally charging the appellant RDS for obstruction, he increased the number of charges after arriving at the police station. Right away when we get out, if not that day, the next day, we got to find a lawyer. I have 9 charges that I have to deal with, and my grandmother doesn't have any money to give up for a lawyer, and my mom doesn't have any money to give up for a lawyer. So we had to try to find legal advice, and lucky enough, my mom knew Rocky. So we went to find Rocky, and we ended up finding Rocky at Dalhousie Legal Aid.
Halifax is a town that there are a lot of segregationists here. We spend more money in a Vogue restaurant than any other single group in this damn city. And I'll bet you $1 that today or tomorrow there'll never be a black working there. Now, the issue is, why don't kids feel they can apply at a place like this?
Literally, Rocky's a social activist legend. Rocky here on a mission. Money. It was a black judge, a black lawyer, black accused, white prosecutor, a police officer who was also a white gentleman. So it was my word against his. The judge ended up using her experience growing up in the community to decide in my favor. That didn't go over well here in Nova Scotia. We then decided that we were going to go up the chain and appeal it to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is where we ultimately won the case. So that case still holds precedence today. But I was warned by my lawyer, Rocky, because at the time I was fully active in selling drugs. I thought that I was, above the law, and in fact, growing up in my community where drug dealing was widely accepted, I just didn't feel that I had to change my ways. 2 weeks later, I was charged in trafficking and narcotics and landed myself in the Waterville institution.
I traveled throughout Canada and the States, speaking at rallies, getting involved in demonstrations. And I did all of that as a way of coming to grips with the fact that we as Black people were oppressed, but we had to be responsible to liberate ourselves. In my community, the African proverb of "it takes a village to raise a child" was truly implemented. It was the strength of that community that gave me the strength as I went through my life to overcome many of the barriers that I have faced.
I started to look at it as me poisoning my community. I started to see some of the effects drugs were having. It was starting to dawn on me. And as a young man, I never seen it when I was caught up in it and making money because I was sold by the materialistic things. We talk about the addiction of drugs. Well, it's quite similar. The addiction to selling drugs is very high too. Rocky was always motivating to me. He was like, never give up, brother. There's more to you. There's something about you. I really felt like I had a powerful influence in my community. And if I was going to have this powerful influence in my community, I wanted to make sure that I was giving the right message to these young men. Because in many instances, most black men, especially coming from Nova Scotia, are seen as either drug dealers or pimps. And I wanted to change that perspective. The first goal was to get my high school diploma. The second goal was to graduate from university. I've done those two things. And the next thing is opening businesses. I didn't want to work for a big bank. I didn't want to work for any big corporation where I would be detached from community. David Upton walks through the door.
Right here? Yeah. This is the building at the end that we can salvage right now.
David actually introduced me to social enterprise. I realized that that was exactly the place I lived. We're talking about social mission and business. And it wasn't soon after that me and Dave began working together on some very interesting projects. I got to learn all these, what I thought were new philosophies, but philosophies that I have been actually implementing since a kid. And that's when I started to realize that Rocky was even a social entrepreneur before social entrepreneurship was social entrepreneurship. It was mind-boggling to me to put it all together. Ted, the displacement in the history here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Yeah. Oh. So we got one of the hottest, coolest groups right now in the city, plain and simple, and everybody's trying to figure out how can we get involved. Right?
We haven't even really taken off.
Then we haven't taken off. Right? I feel anybody can make money, but show me you can make money while creating a positive impact. Okay, so thank you guys for coming, man. Look forward to the next one for sure. Okay, sounds good. You guys have a great day. Yeah, for sure. I also decided to really step outside of my own circles. And it's not just about primarily African Nova Scotians for me. It's about people that are dealing, just need support generally. So I got involved with an organization called 7 Steps Society that is it's support for lifelong criminals. And you could probably understand the connection there in my life and why I can emphasize with those individuals who are trying to reintegrate back in society. So we'll just hit the studio right up here, right across the street, right at the top level. We can use the studio up there. Matt works here at the studio.
I work with formerly incarcerated youth. Spent a lot of time in myself. I got close to 15 years in.
Matt got addicted to drugs early on in his life. Led to him being back and forth in and out of prison. Right? But with the proper help and support, Matt's been doing quite fine. How long you been clean now?
Almost 5 months.
Almost 5 months. You know what I mean? Seriously.
Well, good job, man. Good job. It's hard to do. I know how hard it is. You know what I mean? It's hard to do. But keep yourself a nice, strong support system. Keep working on expressing yourself and allowing your feelings to come out inside your poetry instead of letting them build up. And they'll help you have that release so that you don't end up turning back to the drugs.
You hear me up there?
Okay, go ahead.
23 Hours a Day by Matthew Bond. Don't worry, you'll get your 1 hour out today, they say. What about the 23 hours that I'm locked away? But I'm hungry. It feels like I haven't eaten in days. Don't worry, I'm sure your lunch tray is probably on its way. What about my medication? I know I haven't had it at least 2 days. 48 hours later, I still haven't been out of my cell. Feels like I'm living in hell. All for a little bit of weed, I tried to say.
Hello.
Hi, Mom.
Hi.
What are you doing?
Nothing.
Oh, guess who's on the line?
Who is it?
You can't hear?
Aisha! Do I have to be dressed to impress though? 'Cause
No.
Okay.
Dressed to impress. You don't have to be dressed to impress. No.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, goodbye.
Mommy! Yeah, she wants to come. Yeah, we'll pick me up and then we'll go to McDonald's.
Just this place will never change.
Never changed. They what's the name so over finally.
Oh, are they still there?
Yep.
No.
Yep. People put the money together and made sure that
That's Shirley's car?
that's Rod's car. That's Rod's car. You didn't know you had a
Oh,
car?
that's the little one you used to bring to my house.
Honey.
Hello.
So a lot of my motivation, it comes from my children.
Oh, thanks. Kids said.
Most people look at me like, you got 6 kids? I'm like, yep, I got 6 kids. Right? I own that. Seriously. What's up, man? How are you? Good. She's so calm. She's what'd you do today? Shop.
No, I wish. She did buy a crazy pair of Adidas pants, though. They're just
From
like
where?
the only red ones. You got your belt on? I do now.
Okay. Gigi got all the swaggle.
Does she? I want a pair of the pants that she just got, but I want the ones that rip off. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? You're back in style?
Yeah.
My kids inspire me to do the best that I can do so that ultimately they can be able to, speak about their dad in a positive manner. Something that really stuck with me was one day when my son came home from school and he said, Dad, at school today they say, what does your dad do? All the kids in my school, well, their dad is police. Some of their dads are police officers or successful businessmen or this. That hit home, man. That hurt me. That hurt me because my son couldn't brag about what his, anything that his dad was doing that was positive or, successful in society. So that really landed home and just really drove me to want to do the best I could do for them so that they could have somebody to ultimately look up to and own. Like, that's my dad type of thing. Mom, you have a milkshake you want me? I'm going to put it in a glass for you. Chi, you want a drink? Cherish, you want a drink?
Things got better too between us because we weren't close, right? And then after he started having his children, where I felt like I wasn't a mom that I should have been. So I made sure I would always be there for my grandkids.
Tell me how good it is. That's the watered down juice.
No, it's not.
For sure.
Is it good yours?
It's watered down, ain't it? Be real.
No, it's alright.
Keep trying.
Wait till your father takes.
I tried.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's not pickle piece better though.
It's orange puff and cream soda puff. Flat.
They thought I was tired on them. Man used to come up the street just like this, look. It was so bad. Everybody in the community knew too. Look, just like this. Just like this. In hand. Where's he at? I know you seen him. Where's he at? They're off him. Look, they can see her coming. Your mom's coming, cuz your mom's coming. I'm already on my high tail trying to get down to my dance house because I know I gotta get to the safe haven. My biggest obstacle within me that I have to overcome and own is really developing a positive relationship with my children's mom. And that's something that that's an obstacle in my life that's really dear to my heart because ultimately it affects how my kids feel about me. I think it's important to pass that message on to the many young men out there that still live that type of lifestyle and don't understand how important fatherhood is in this society. To have our moms doing everything is just so overwhelming for them. It limits their success because they're focused on doing other things in life that the father figure and the father role in the family household usually takes on. I have to own that as a young man. Them kids are smart, man. Our kids will do better once they know better. But it's up to us as a society to teach them. They see and they start to believe because I was just like them not long ago.
Hello, everyone. So, sincere apologies for the sound. I know this is the first time we're screening a short documentary, so we'll work on it. For those that had trouble with the sound, what we'll do is we will send a link to the short documentary. You can find the documentary on YouTube under the Canadian Race Relations Foundation's YouTube page, or if you Google RDS versus the story of race and justice, you'll be able to find the whole video so that you can watch. So basically, we'll run down. I'll give a short rundown of a summary of the video, the documentary, and kind of talk about the issue of systematic racism here in Canada. So as the documentary elucidated, Rodney was a young man that had an interaction with a police officer. The police officer was arresting someone he knew. Rodney approached the situation to ask the young man that was being arrested if he should call their mom. And Rodney was arrested and charged for lots of incidents, and he explained it in the video as the shotgun approach, where police officers give you a large number of charges, and when you are arraigned or when you're going for your trial, they make an agreement with you to cut down a section of the charges, and then they keep the main charges. So Rodney's case went to the Supreme Court, and it was found that the cops used excessive force, which is what we are seeing right now. This idea and this practice of excessive force by cops is something that is not new. Canada is not immune to racism. In fact, Canada's inception is based on racism through settler colonization, which stem from the ideas of white supremacy. White supremacy espouses acts, behavior, attitudes, etc. that situate white people, the idea of whiteness, as sole beneficiaries of land, wealth, societal benefits, and political rights. In 1867, the Prime Minister John Macdonald ushered in residential schools. This work was primarily based on the work of a member of parliament named Nicholas Flood Davin. He commissioned a report that formalized the implementation of residential schools. I want to read a few quotes from the report. And before I read these quotes, I want to state that these quotes are highly troubling and might be triggering for a number of people. So before I read them, I want to state that. The first quote: "The Indian is a man with traditions of his own, which make civilization a puzzle of despair. He has suspicion, distrust, fault-finding tendency in insincerity, and flattery produced in all subject races. He is crafty, but conscious how weak his craft is when opposed to the superior cunning of the white man." And this first quote is exactly related to the ideas of white supremacy, which I explained as acts and behaviors that situate white people as sole beneficiaries. The second quote starts off by saying, "The missionaries' experience is only surpassed by their patient heroism and their testimony like that of school teachers, like that of authorities at Washington in the United States. That if anything is to be done with the Indian, we must catch him very young. The children must be kept constantly within the circle of civilized conditions." I want to read two more recommendations that MP Nicholas Davin made in this report that was submitted to John Macdonald. One of the recommendations states, "Some distinction should be made between the treatment of parents who send their children regularly to the day school and of those who are either careless whether their children go to school or not, or who are wholly opposed to their children attending school. To the first, an additional ration of tea and sugar might be given." And I want folks to think about what was just said. the idea that indigenous children who refuse to go to school will be prevented from having food to eat. The last recommendation that I'll read states, I will leave it at that recommendation. The next recommendation is a little troubling, and even I am having difficulty reading it. Nonetheless, I would ask folks to Google the Nicholas Flood Davin report, and you can read it. So, what do these ideas mean? These ideas are wrapped in the formalities of racism that have created Canadian institutions. Thus, when we talk about systematic racism here in Canada, this is how it is linked to Indigenous nations, Indigenous communities, and Indigenous peoples. It is this same idea of white supremacy and racism that has also been transposed to Black communities as well. The relationship with policing starts in this country in 1873 when Canada's first policing body, the RCMP, was founded, and their main function was to protect the economic interest of white settlers. This was law enforcement to push and move Indigenous communities and nations into reserves. For the Black community here in Canada, there was also the implementation of racial segregation, where the last segregated school in Canada was closed in 1983. Canada also prides itself in being a country that is open to newcomers and immigrants. However, in 1910, there was the Immigration Act. And in that act, it prohibited entry of immigrants belonging to any race deemed unsuited to the climate or requirements of the land. This is very troubling. In 1910, there was the incident where the Imperial Order, daughter of the Empire, petitioned the Canadian government to exclude Black men from the Canadian society. These highlight the presumed superiority of white people, and these ideas are perpetuated in all acts of government. Canada tells itself that police brutality doesn't occur here. This is a lie. Today, we see that there are numerous names of Black and Indigenous folks that have died at the hands of policing. The names need to be mentioned, need to be shouted out. And so while many people, including folks in Hamilton, think that the discussion around police brutality, the discussion around defunding the police, the discussion about systematic racism is not a thing here. I would say it is definitely a thing here. I want to take a minute or two to read out names of individuals that have passed at the hands of police brutality and police interaction. Regis Koczynski Paquet, Jason Collins, Aisha Hudson, DeAndre Campbell, Sean Thompson, Greg Ritchie, Pierre Coriola, Abdi Rahman Abdi, Kwesi Peters, Andrew Loko, Jermaine Carby, Sami Yatin, Michael Wade Lawson, Lester Donaldson, Kevin Stewart Andrews, these are the names that I list today. There are many more that have died, that have been harassed, that have been injured by the police. For folks that are in Hamilton that are saying this is not a problem here, I would like to read something for you. In 2003, Chevrana Abdi, a 26-year-old black transgender woman, died in police custody under highly suspicious circumstances. According to the witness quoted in the Hamilton Spectator, police were called by a neighbor because Abdi was yelling and acting strangely towards others in her building. Abdi was handcuffed and dragged face down 7 flights of stairs by law enforcement officers. The officers claimed that they were fatigued from carrying her and forced to release her legs, letting her lower limbs drag while they carried her upper body face down. By the time they reached the lobby on the main floor, she was not breathing and subsequently died in police custody. So, this is years of police brutality, years of violence, loss, And I think as we question the role of policing in our societies and here in Hamilton, we need to ask ourselves this question. Is it worthwhile spending $170 million of taxpayers' money into a police force that just murdered a black trans woman, dragged Shavrana Abdi down 7 flights of stairs? It's also not lost on us that earlier on this week, there was an independent review into the events that happened at Pride Hamilton 2019. And the crust of that report states that the Hamilton Police Service inadequately prepared for what was going to transpire at Hamilton Pride and failed. They failed to protect the individuals that were at Pride. It is time that we put an end to the ballooning budgets of policing and invest that money into community initiatives that care for people and treat people with dignity. So when we say Canada has a systematic racism problem, yes, it does. When we say defund the police, and defund means defund. In Hamilton, the police budget is $170 million. Ottawa, $319 million. Toronto, $1 billion. So I leave you all, those that have tuned in, to ask yourself that question. In Hamilton, there is going to be discussion around policing, and it's important that we ask these critical questions and hold our elected officials accountable. I'm going to go through some of the questions that might have come through whilst I was talking. Okay, no questions, just let's see here. Does anyone know the spelling of the? Yes, so Shavrana Abdi was the black transgender woman that was murdered at the hands of police here in Hamilton. So this issue is an important issue. And again, as I said, those of you that are listening, exactly, I think we have a message here from Diana. Diana is saying we all need to email the mayor to ask for defunding the police. Yes, you are right, Diana. I think in Hamilton, the mayor is the chair of the police board, and so we need every one of you to email the mayor and email your respective councillor to tell them it is time to defund the police. Kate King is asking, now sounds like the time. Definitely, Kate. And apparently 20% is on the table. No, 20% is not enough. We are asking for the full defund. And I want to paint a picture for everyone that is listening today. Everyone has seen the public murder of George Floyd. You know, I see it as when that individual put his knee on his neck, applying immense force, and George shouted, "I can't breathe." He was asking for that individual to remove his knee off his neck. And that is the literal definition of defund: removing police influence on Black, indigenous people of color. The idea of reducing the budget to 20%. Do you think that if a police officer puts their knee on someone and we say, can you reduce the amount of pressure you are applying by 20%? That does nothing. That does nothing. There's going to be a lot of discussions around reform. And to be honest, I will tell you that reform doesn't work because since 1863, police brutality has been happening. And so we have over 100 years of evidence, over 150 years of evidence stating that police brutality doesn't work and continues to murder Black, indigenous people of color. So those reforms don't work. We have Deanne saying, everyone who is available, come out to the rallies on Friday at City Hall at 4 p.m. and on Saturday, Gore Park and Dundon Park at 2 p.m. to advocate for full defunding of police. Thank you, Diana, for sharing. Yes, support. The most important, and as I've said, is email the mayor, email your counselor, and ask them for the full defund of the police. We have a question from Emma. This will be the last one. What are your thoughts on services that would be better focuses for investment? There are the obvious ones like healthcare. Anything else? Yes, you could invest in transit. Earlier on this year, Councillor Narendra Nand put a motion forward to develop a multi-purpose community hub to ensure that we have spaces for the 2+ LGBTQIA community, underserved community. There's also investment in mental health, harm reduction, housing, even infrastructure for bike lanes, right? Affordable housing. There's a long list of things that 171 million could be going into. So we have work to do. I will also ensure that we are sharing the information that we have. Again, if you have questions, you can email us at info@hcci.ca for more resources. So I think our time is up. We would like to thank Annette and Vanessa for joining us and doing the ASL interpretation. Would also like to thank our sponsors, the YWCA, Sasha, the Sexual Assault Center, Hamilton and area, the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, Rabo Media, Okasi, and those are all the organizations that have supported our conference. So thank you all for tuning in. I will leave with you a couple of resources. I will type them out. So for those of you that want further information, further reading, we have a book called Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard that people can read. We also have Until We Are Free by Black Lives Matter Toronto. Specifically, Rodney DeVilliers, Sandy Hudson, and Cyrus Marcus Ware. And I'm going to give you two more. The Skin We Are In by Desmond Cole. All written by Black folk that are organizing for the liberation of Black people across the world. And this last one, while it's not written by a Black person, I think it also details how systematic racism is used in urban planning and how our cities are built. This one is called Displacing Blackness, Planning, Power, and Race in 20th Century Halifax by Ted Rutland. And so I leave you with that. We went 5 minutes over time, and thank you for tuning in. And like I said, it's a fire truck. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, our action item for this session is: if you're in Hamilton, please email your mayor, please email your respective city councilor and ask them it is time to defund the police because they keep on murdering Black and Indigenous people of color, and they are failing to keep the public safe. Thank you all. Good night, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, same time, 6 to 7. And big thanks to Annette and Vanessa. See you all.